Now we take a look at what's going on in the state of Texas with our good friend Patrick Svitek with the Texas Tribune. Hey, Patrick, how's it going?
Hey, good morning, Chad.
Thanks for joining us today. Let's take a look. We learned, of course, this week we've got a special session that'll begin on July 18th. I had the governor on yesterday, and he took a few swipes at the Texas House and said that the priorities of Speaker Joe Straus were not in line with his priorities that he called for the special session. I know the Dallas Morning News had a piece yesterday doing a little bit of finger pointing back at the lieutenant governor. So what, I guess basically who all's blaming who on this, and does it really matter because we're going to have a special session no matter what?
I think it absolutely matters, considering the fact that we're going to have a special session in 5 or 6 weeks, and the governor's laid out a very ambitious agenda for that special session. And I think that, you know, what he and what other legislative leaders say or do in the lead up to that is going to be closely watched by lawmakers, I think. Yeah. And as you pointed out yesterday, you had him on your show, and I think he did a radio interview the day before that. And taken together, those two media appearances, offered some pretty harsh words for legislators. I know he just kind of reiterated what he said in his press conference in some ways, but he did go a little further, as you pointed out in your interview at the very least, in kind of siding with Dan Patrick in this long simmering battle between the House and the Senate. Ever since he's taken office, he's tried to kind of be the mediator there and try to be the guy kind of in the middle, and I think he's kind of taken pride in that, in his ability to kind of be positioned politically between the House and the Senate. But I think as we get closer to this special session, it's pretty clear that it's Abbott and Dan Patrick versus Joe Straus. And as we saw in the radio interviews he did this week, I think he's increasingly willing to give voice to those that kind of dynamic in a public way.
When you see something like this, where the governor, as you've said, and anyone who's watched the governor, I think the past few years have seen that he stands back from the fray, right? I mean, he doesn't get involved in this Joe Straus versus Dan Patrick. Is the House too moderate? Is the Senate too conservative? He doesn't get involved in that, except for now. And is that a result? And I'm just asking your opinion, just as a journalist who's covered this. Is that a result of all the news stories that have come out in the last few weeks of where's Greg Abbott? Is Greg Abbott involved in this? Is Dan Patrick truly in charge? Is part of this the governor just got kind of fed up with everything, and including some of his big items not getting through?
I think there's two factors there. I think one of them is certainly what you just laid out, which is that there's been this narrative building for the past few months. You could argue maybe even for the past several months before the session began, that Dan Patrick was the one who was kind of leading the political conversation in Texas and kind of the one setting the agenda. I think the governor in some ways thought that he could, was confident in his ability to swoop in toward the end of the session and, walk away with the win basically and be able to get everyone on the same page. Clearly that didn't happen. And I think that the comments that you're seeing from him now are, coming from two sources of frustration. I think one, may be that narrative again that Dan Patrick was the one who was in charge. And two, I think may just be, out of frustration with the fact that things didn't come together at the end of the regular session. We know this is a governor who loathes having to go to special session, made that very clear ever since he took office. And I think that, he is frustrated that the two chambers were not able to get on the same page in those final weeks and hammer out an agreement. And so I think that's part of the equation as well.
Patrick, how on earth can these lawmakers get through 20 items in 30 days?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think
I don't think it can get done. I know the governor yesterday said all you have to do is pass one bill a day. That's right, all. Yeah. And if you don't do it, you're lazy and there's no will. But let's be honest, there's Republicans don't agree with each other in the House. I mean, not everyone's on board with each other, and I don't see this happening. I don't see 20 items passing in 30 days. I don't see 10 of these things passing.
Right, and that's why I've described this to so many people as a kind of short-term political victory for the governor. I mean, obviously this list kind of delighted the conservative activist wing of the Republican Party here in Texas, but it's a long-term political uncertainty because I think that a lot of lawmakers are going to be looking toward him to show leadership and to guide this agenda through the special session. And it's obviously a very ambitious agenda, and if he falls short, if there aren't 20 items that are passed, it's going to be up to him to define victory, and it's going to be up to him to, as you alluded to yesterday in your interview, determine whether this is worth going to subsequent special sessions for.
Okay, let's take a look at Ken Paxton, because with all the news of the special session, there's been news with Ken Paxton and his case, but it just hasn't, it hasn't really been as big and bold in the news as the special session. So what is the latest on Ken Paxton and his securities fraud case?
Yeah, so it looks more likely than ever that Ken Paxton is going to be getting a new judge in this case. This case has been going on for more than 2 years, and for most of those 2 years, he's had the same judge, George Gallagher, out of North Texas, out of Tarrant County. And, in recent weeks, basically ever since Gallagher ordered a change of venue to Harris County, Paxton's team has been just working around the clock to find ways to get rid of this judge and to get a new guy on the case. And there was an appeals court ruling a little while ago that basically backed their push for a new judge. And the prosecutors had asked the state's highest criminal court, the Court of Criminal Appeals, to basically overturn that ruling. Court of Criminal Appeals said, no, we're not going to take up that case. And so with that kind of final ruling from the Court of Criminal Appeals, that leaves the appeals court ruling standing. And so it looks like he's going to be getting a new judge soon. But there's still a lot of uncertainty. As part of that appeals court ruling a little while ago, they wiped out the September 12th trial date. And right now there's technically not a trial date yet. And so we're looking at the prospect of this trial being pushed even further back into the year.
Do we know where a trial will take place?
Yeah, at this point, it's a near certainty that it will be in that changed venue in Harris County in Houston.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if, with a new judge, if Team Paxton can go in and say, hey, now we want a new location. We got a new judge.
Right.
We want a new location now.
Yeah, I mean, given how this case has gone over the past 2 years, I wouldn't rule out that they may have some kind of legal trick up their sleeve. But as of right now, I think it's pretty fair to say that the trial is going to be held in Harris County in Houston.
We've got until July 18th. Of course, the governor wants lawmakers to go ahead and start working on the issues, but technically they don't have to start working until July 18th, I guess. So, what are you and the good folks at the Tribune working on until then? What can we expect to see over the weekend and into early next week?
Well, I think we're taking, like a lot of lawmakers, we're taking a break, but we're also still picking up the pieces, I think, from the final weeks of the regular session, looking at kind of what went wrong and what led us to this moment. You obviously alluded to that Dallas Morning News piece that was done yesterday, and, I think there's still plenty more reporting to be done on kind of where things went astray and why they weren't able to come together and how we got to this point. So you can probably expect more from the Tribune on that.
All right, very good. Patrick Svitek, TexasTribune.org. As always, appreciate your time, and we'll visit with you later on.
Thanks so much, Chad.
All right, thanks, Patrick. That's Patrick Svitek with the Texas Tribune.